Hey guys, and welcome to the review of the third entry in the Donkey Kong Country series, Donkey Kong Country 3, Dixie Kong's Double Trouble. Dixie Kong's Double Trouble is actually considered among many fans a black sheep of the franchise, but then there is another category of fans who very much welcome it as an awesome third entry in a series and think it's very underrated, and I very much fall in the latter camp. I mean, I don't think maybe it's quite as perfect as Donkey Kong Country 2, Diddy's Conquest, but it's still very much an awesome entry in the series that very much brings some of its own unique and innovative ideas. And I think it's a perfect way to conclude an awesome trilogy, and I really love that game. And also, fun fact, this game actually was released like 3 months after Nintendo 64, which might actually be another reason why this game isn't as popular as the first two, because most kids around the world were actually busy playing Nintendo 64 while I was playing my Donkey Kong Country 3, Dixie Kong's Double Trouble, and wasn't even aware that there was such a thing as Nintendo 64. And Wrinkly Kong, the grandmother of the Kongs, she's actually seen playing this console as a way to promote the console a couple of times in the game. We'll talk about it very much. But let's talk about the most underrated entry in the franchise, Donkey Kong Country 3, Dixie Kong's Double Trouble. The story of the game is, again, like the previous two games before it, pretty paper thin most of the time, but like Diddy's Conquest before it, it clearly tries to be different and unique and build upon what happened before, and I say it does it quite well. This time, both Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong both went missing, and Dixie Kong goes to the Northern Hemisphere to look for them and is accompanied by her baby cousin Kiddy Kong, who's another reason why this game for so many people is so mixed. Kiddy Kong wasn't a very popular character, but we'll get to that later. Originally, Donkey Kong was supposed to be with Dixie, but considering that he's technically the titular character, he would very much overshadow her, and this was supposed to be her game. I think it was a logical choice, since again, it will be pretty awkward for Donkey Kong to be a supporting protagonist in his own game series. In Northern Hemisphere, Dixie and Kiddy encounter Kremling remains who are taking over Northern Hemisphere under leadership of the robot Chaos. Though, it doesn't take a genius to figure out, Chaos is just a puppet of King K. Rool, who now took a mad scientist persona and names himself Baron K. Rulenstein. The new world in Donkey Kong Country 3 Dixie's Double Trouble is Northern Hemisphere, which is closer to Donkey Kong Island than Crocodile Isle, in that again there is beautiful colorful nature as opposed to gloomy Croc Isle. Though, while Donkey Kong Isle is clearly based on African jungles, Northern Hemisphere atmosphere and nature is clearly based on that on Canada, Northeastern United States, as well as parts of Europe. First area is Lake Orangutenga with a beautiful lake and mills, as well as a ski resort. And then the next area is Kremwood Forest, a very Canada, European or Northeastern American inspired forest. And then there is Cotton Top Cove, a beautiful area full of amazing waterfalls. And then there is Mechanis, next to which, in similar fashion to Krem Industries in the first game, is where Kremlings established their factories and destroyed once beautiful area. And then there is K3, a snowy area that strongly gives me vibes of snowy European Alps. I guess natural, since as a little kid, in addition to play the hell out of that series, I would also go skiing in my family frequently, either in Austrian, Swiss or Northern Italian Alps. So natural that I was getting vibes of them from that area, even though I bet that K3 is much more likely based on some Canadian snowy mountains and ski resorts, still pretty similar. And then there is Razor Ridge, a mountainous area with a lake in the center and ski lifts, chairlifts, what am I saying? Game Boy Advance Remake also acts Extra Area Pacifica, and while I do prefer SNES version, I do think Game Boy Advance version is worth playing due to Pacifica among other things. Really cool water area. And then there is Chaos Core, a final area which some say is a jungle, but considering that Northern Hemisphere is based on Canada, I think it is more of a rainforest than a jungle, and this is also an area of Chaos Castle where the final boss battle is fought. I gotta give a shout out to that detail. You see that pink glow at the top of the castle? That's where the final boss is actually fought. And then there is Lost World here too, but we'll get to that later. I really love the new unique levels in this game, like in the previous two games before it. Each level feels very unique and distinct from one another, and it's literally impossible to tell any level apart. And I really love how in some levels you truly can get two different perspectives, like in the very first levels of the game you can walk above the water, but then you jump in the water and swim in it, and you can just switch around between underwater and above water, and you can even see the whole level from the perspective of a fish. Sure, they certainly did try something like that before, but here I truly feel they decided to touch up the detail like it actually feels there are two different perspectives in the same level. There are even more gimmick levels than there were in the previous games, like, while Diddy's Conquest also had plenty, it seems like this game decided to go above and beyond with gimmicks, like in this tree level where a giant saw blade chases you, or in this mountain area you climb the rope all the way to the very top, or how in this factory level you play as Squitter the spider, but clearly there is enemy lurking within trying to shoot at you. And the underwater levels are also really beautiful, like look at that beautiful colorful coral. Another unique gimmick about the game as a whole is that, just as in Donkey Kong Country 2, there are also DK coins here too. And like in Donkey Kong Country 2, they are also very much required to collect them all in order to fully complete the game, but this game puts a very interesting spin and twist on it, because in Donkey Kong Country 2 you were just looking for DK coins whenever you found one, but here, in every level, there is this crumbling enemy named Coin who is holding a decaying coin, and then you have to pick a steel keg and throw it so it would hit him from the back and defeat him. But thing is, he's always facing the same direction, he's always facing across from you, which means that you have to always find a way around to throw a steel keg so it hits his back, and then you got a decaying coin. I really love that unique additional gimmick in the game, it's really amazing. And defeating coins generally is really fun, especially when you have to find creative, innovative ways to defeat them, even though by this point I'm very used to it at this point. Although, outside of going above and beyond with the gimmick levels, I say the overall gameplay in Donkey Kong Country 3 Dixie Kong's Double Trouble is in general pretty similar to the previous two games in terms of platforming and all that, although here's where we're coming to one of the reasons why plenty of people don't really like this game, and that's Diddy Kong was largely disliked because he admittedly doesn't play as well as Diddy or Donkey for that matter. He's very strong, but most of the time it's not really that useful much. If anything, he's as a result much slower than that, and it's hard to control him a little because of that. Like, his strength can be used when he can throw Dixie high up. Dixie can't really hold her baby cousin that easily, but she can throw him to break some paths that reveal paths to bonus rooms, but admittedly that can mostly be done only in Lake Orangatanga and then in one level in Contotop Cove. Afterwards, it's not really used at all. It's only used in 3 still levels, that's it. Still, I don't think Kiddy Kong is necessarily a bad character, but in terms of gameplay, he certainly isn't as comfortable playing as either Donkey or Diddy were. The map of Northern Hemisphere is quite different from Donkey Kong Island map and Crocodile Isle. This time, it's kind of semi-open world in that in previous two games, the only places you could enter were areas on the map and you were following them in linear path, but in Dixie's Double Trouble, you can just freely roam around the map on the water in a water vehicle and even uncover some secrets, plenty of which will lead to 100% game completion. Generally, as you proceed further in the game, you visit Funky's workshop called Funky's Rentals, and Funky Kong will give you a new vehicle that can take you new places. You start on a regular motorboat and you can only visit areas around this smaller area in the map. Until you beat Kremwood Forest, Funky will build you a hovercraft that lets you travel through the rocks. After you beat Cotton Top Cove and Mechanus, you get 2 skis after bosses of each world, and Funky will build you a turbo ski which can go through waterfalls. The enemies are pretty unique and some of their designs are even more cartoony now, and boss battles are great. Some are pretty underwhelming and not as great as in the predecessor, such as Squirt the Waterfall, but some others on the other hand might actually even be better. They're even more unique than they were in Donkey Kong Country 2. There is Belcha the Living Barrel who shoots bugs at you and you have to fit him his own bugs which pushes him backwards. And then there is Blink the Evil Snowman with whom you have a snowball fight duel. Many people would dismiss Swanky's Dash as nothing more than a mini-game, but its true purpose is to fight for Bleak. And as I said, I think the fight with him is awesome, the snowball duel and all that. And then there is also Erich the Spider. And the final boss battle against Baron K. Rulenstein might be my second favorite boss battle in all 3 video games, only behind the final boss battle with Captain K. Rool in the second game. And animal bodies do return. What Donkey Kong Country game would be complete without awesome animal bodies? Rambi the Rhino doesn't return, but he gets replaced by Ellie the Elephant, and well, I don't think Ellie is quite as awesome as Rambi, but she's still pretty cool in her own way and doesn't feel like a cheap replacement but a unique animal body with her own unique abilities. Like, I love how she can take water into her trunk and shoot with it. And Squitter the Spider also returns, which is simply awesome since he was my favorite in Diddy's Conquest and he's very much my favorite here too. And who cares about the others? As long as we have Squitter, we are good. And Spokes the Parrot returns too, and he's pretty much what he has been in 2, as does Angar the Swordfish. Angar the Swordfish is probably the only animal body you have in all 3 video games. There is also a new animal body, Perry, a small bird, although he really is very weak and he really doesn't fight. Generally, he's actually more of a nuisance than anything, because generally you're required to basically take him all over through the level until he's no animal sign, which generally lends you a reward, although many of those rewards are not really worth all the effort of carrying him over, although there are instances where it's really necessary because you won't get 100 game completion, because in 2 of the levels actually by carrying him past his no animal sign you get a bonus room as a reward, which are necessary if you want 100% game completion. Another major criticism of this game is that the music and soundtrack is not as good as in the first 2 games, and I do sort of agree that yes, it's certainly not as good as in the first 2 games, but I still think it's a really great soundtrack in its own right. Some would say nostalgia, and I'm not gonna lie, this soundtrack very much is nostalgic to me because I've been playing all 3 of those video games in my childhood, so yes, the soundtrack here certainly is pretty nostalgic to me, but I still think it's a overall great soundtrack in its own right. Even if it's not as good as the soundtrack in the first 2 games, it's still so atmospheric and it fits so well with the world of Northern Hemisphere, and it also fits, and also every soundtrack in every level fits perfectly well with the level itself, such as the soundtrack Underwater in the Coral Reef. It's so atmospheric and gives you the feeling like something is lurking in, trying to get you, which sort of makes sense in that context. The winter theme, Frosty Frolics, is also really good. It's so atmospheric and so well it fits with the theme of winter. And yeah, even as a little kid anytime I looked out the window during winter and saw the snow or went to ski in the Alps with my family, that theme would always play in my head. Also, forest stages in which you climb inside giant, massive hollow trees are also really great, and they perfectly fit well with the theme of the forest. They give this feeling of the unknown in the forest, or of the fall weather. And the whole music theme of Northern Hemisphere is really good. It totally perfectly summarizes what Northern Hemisphere overall feels like. It's just so peaceful with its beautiful nature, but also so mysterious, since this is technically a land that Kongs are very much visiting, only to see it's being taken over by the Kremlings. Overall, I still really love the soundtrack of Donkey Kong Country 3 Dixie Kong's Double Trouble. While it's not quite as good as it was in the first two games, it's still a really great soundtrack in its own way, and in some ways it feels even like it's even more about the tension in the game actually. I love it. And just as Donkey Kong Country 2, there is also a secret world called Crematoa in Donkey Kong Country 3 Dixie Kong's Double Trouble. You uncover Crematoa by using your turbo ski and swim around the rocks. And as you can imagine, I only learned about it when I was a teenager. Again, as a little kid, I had no idea about it. And again, I can only wonder what a little kid version of me would think of that extra world. I can only imagine a little kid version of myself learning that there are 5 extra levels with another fight against Baron K. Rulenstein and getting so super excited about it. In general though, Donkey Kong Country 3 Dixie Kong's Double Trouble requires a lot more from you to beat them than just extra world. In addition to getting all the bonus coins which you need to unlock each level in Crematoa, as you roam the map of Northern Hemisphere, you encounter caves with banana birds, and finding them all is also very much essential to completing the full game. Plus, there are also new characters, brother bears, who each tells you his story, and each of them has some unique characteristic, and talking to them very much is also required to fully complete the game. Like Barnacle in Lake Orangutenga will give you a banana bird for a shell, which you buy from Bazaar in the very beginning of the game. Blunder, on the other hand, is the one that will let you know about the Lost World. While Blue is very sad that nobody remembered about his birthday party, but then Blizzard at K3 will remember and give you the present that you have to deliver to Blue. While Barter will give you a wrench that fixes the lift at Bjorn Brothers, and that chairlift will take you to another banana bird cave. Some people also did not really like it. They thought it was exhausting, but I personally actually really love it. It gives the game so much more content and adds something innovative. I actually really love it. What also certainly didn't work in the game's favor is that this game was released 3 months after new console Nintendo 64 was released, and understandably, people were very much focused on a new console. So, well, I on the other hand didn't even know Nintendo 64 existed, I didn't know even there was such a thing. So yes, while most kids all over the world were busy playing their new console Nintendo 64, I was still just playing my favorite Donkey Kong Country trilogy on an SNES at my house. Even Wrinkly Kong actually was playing Nintendo 64, although it seems like she outright said not to let Cranky know about that console because she wouldn't be able to get it off him. Yep, seems like just like me, Cranky wasn't aware about Nintendo 64 at the time. And while Wrinkly's playing it, music from Super Mario 64 is actually playing, although, funnily enough, whenever I hear that music, I always think of Wrinkly playing it, because throughout my whole childhood, whenever I would hear this music, it would always be as Wrinkly is playing Nintendo 64 instead of actually... And I didn't play Mario 64 until late teens. Donkey Kong Country 3 Dixie Kong's Double Trouble is a truly amazing game, and while maybe it's not quite to the level of quality of its predecessor, it's still very much an almost perfect sequel, and the best comparison I'll give it is the Dark Knight trilogy, which is a similar scenario. The Dark Knight Rises gets a lot of unfair, unjustified hate, even though it's still very much a fantastic, magnificent movie that maybe is just not quite as good as its predecessor, The Dark Knight. And Donkey Kong Country 3, I say, is in a very similar boat. It's still a nearly flawless sequel and really deserves as much love as its predecessor, because it's still an almost perfect sequel in every way and a perfect conclusion to a wonderful platforming trilogy on SNES. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so that concludes my review of the last entry in the awesome franchise Donkey Kong Country 3 Dixie Kong's Double Trouble. Even if the game isn't as perfect as Donkey Kong Country 2 Diddy's Kong Quest, I still think it's an amazing game with some of its own original and unique ideas. And it's actually my second favorite in the franchise, only behind 2. I actually like this one more than the very first entry in the series. And another thing, so we're concluding our Donkey Kong Country marathon, but I might actually do a bonus review of Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, which is very much an awesome game of its own. It will take a little bit of time because it's more like a bonus video, not technically part of that marathon. I mean, it is a bonus, but you know what I mean. So I probably will review Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, but I'm in no rush to do that yet. I will try to do it in like the following 2 months, but for now, this concludes our Donkey Kong Country marathon, my childhood video games and my favorite video games of all time. So, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for checking out this video. Press the like button, please subscribe to this channel, and I'll talk to you soon in another video, back downstairs in the room we generally make videos. Talk to you then, bye!